In today's story, we'll look at the lonely life of a woman named Anne, who survived on Earth after a massive nuclear war destroyed most of humanity. She lives in a field together with her little dog. She often goes to the ruined city to collect supplies, covering her entire body to protect against radiation and always carrying an oxygen tank for fear of breathing in contaminated air. Their farm is located in a valley, so even though the journey is long, it's safe and convenient to travel this way. This valley is believed to be radiation-free, and after every supply run, and thoroughly cleanses her body. At night, the dog sleeps with her to heal her loneliness. Most of the time, and is bored, just doing daily chores like checking farm animals, fences, and traps set in the woods. The dog helps and by sniffing out rabbits, but one day, Anne was shocked to find an abandoned car on the road. She tried to go closer to check it out, but the dog signaled that someone was nearby, so they ran and hid in the grass. Then, John, wearing a protective suit, brought his cart and continued his journey while and watched from a distance. Realizing another survivor existed, she quietly followed him. The man used a device to confirm the place was radiation-free, then took off his helmet and breathed the fresh air. John even took off his suit and shouted in excitement while and watched him. When Anne came out, John was bathing under a waterfall and rushed to tell him the water was contaminated. But since she was holding a hunting rifle, John thought she was threatening him. John pointed his gun back at and asking where the others were while firing a shot into the air, and raised both hands and warned him the water was contaminated. Terrified, John rushed to his cart to check with his device. Realizing he had actually bathed in radioactive water, he started vomiting. He frantically grabbed a syringe and some medicine, asking Anne to inject it, and was suspicious because John was shouting, so John threw his gun away and swore he wouldn't hurt her. Then, Anne injected him and offered to take him to her house. John explained that he needed an injection once a day and asked her to burn his clothes. After covering his body, he came with Anne and asked her to burn his body if he died on the farm. After Anne thoroughly scrubbed and washed John with clean water, he could no longer walk, so Anne had to drag him all the way to the bed. The next morning, Anne went back to John's cart to get supplies, and among them, she found photos of John with a woman. As the days passed, Anne continued to take care of John, checking his temperature, feeding him good food, and giving him injections. At night, John's body would shiver and shake from the fever, and Anne couldn't sleep because of his delirious shouting. So, Anne put wet clothes on his body to reduce the heat and stayed awake for many hours. Sometimes she would accidentally fall asleep by John's side, and when she woke up, she would pray for his recovery, even going to the church to play the organ and pray. Finally, John recovered and was able to get out of bed, though Anne still has to help him walk, and explains that her family stayed here because her father told them the valley would protect them. However, she says that one day, he left to search for other survivors and never returned. John is confused since he doesn't understand why this valley is free of radiation, and Anne can't explain it. But Anne hugs him to distract his mind. The next morning, John finds Anne carefully taking care of the plants by hand. John reads agriculture books from the library, and afterward, despite still being weak, he approaches Anne and tells him she can't use the tractor because it's out of petrol, and the petrol pumps aren't working because there's no electricity. John explains how to operate the pumps manually, so Anne rushes to the gas station and is excited and happy when she gets the petrol. John watches Anne from a distance through his rifle scope from the house. A moment later, Anne is happily plowing the fields with the tractor, while the little dog enthusiastically follows behind her. That night, during dinner, John quietly watches and say her prayers. Then, he mentions that he survived because he was working as a researcher in a government bunker when the war broke out. He says that later, he felt trapped, so he left the bunker because he wanted his real life back. When Anne asks if he is looking for his wife from the photo, he replies that the woman is not his wife. When it's time to sleep, Anne intentionally leaves her bedroom door open. Though John notices her beautiful legs, he just walks into his own room. The next day, the two of them go fishing at the pond, and Anne swims. While watching Anne swim, they lock eyes, and they cook and eat the fish together later. Anne explains that this pond is a source of groundwater, and when winter comes, the pond freezes. She also shares how difficult it was to survive last year, because her home generator broke down. When they return home, John checks the generator and confirms that the engine is completely ruined, and thinks it's her fault, but John says the generator was very old, so it would have broken down anyway. When Anne jokingly mentions doing a school project with potatoes, John gets an idea. He goes to look at the waterfall and, seeing its size, confirms they can build a water wheel needed for a generator here. However, building it would require a lot of wood, which is why John considers tearing down the church, and strongly objects to this because her father built that church to preach every Sunday, and she believes that the church itself protects the valley. John points out that whether it was her father or God, they might have left the church for them to use to start over, but Anne does not accept it. That very night, the dog kept barking at the door for some reason. The next morning, Anne did her usual chores while John did maintenance on the machines. After that, he went to a roadside market to pick up supplies. When Anne arrived, she found John heavily drunk, throwing boxes around, and saying he now knew her character by looking at which supplies she used up and which ones she left behind. That night, when Anne tried to help John to bed, John got angry, said he didn't need help, and shoved her against the wall. Terrified, Anne ran into her room, and the next day, John looked for eggs but couldn't find a single one. He then apologized to Anne for his behavior. When Anne went to play the organ at the church, she noticed someone watching her from afar, but when she came out, no one was there. So assuming it was John, she went to tell him that he must have listened to her playing. However, John said he hadn't gone anywhere near the church. In the evening, they had dinner with good wine and danced together. Eventually they kissed, but as the kiss deepened, John stopped, thanked her for dinner, and went into his room. A few minutes later, John came to Anne's room, and Anne immediately took off her dress, but John told her to put it back on. Upset, and asked what she did wrong, but John reassured her, saying, "You are attractive, but if things get deeper emotionally, everything will change, so we need to take our time." The next morning, when Anne told John he could take the church if he wanted, John refused because he didn't want to disappoint her again. A while later, while Anne was checking her traps, the dog suddenly barked and ran up the hill. When Anne followed, she met a man named Caleb, who pleaded that he only wanted water and didn't want to hurt anyone, and brought him back to the farm and had to stop John, who was about to shoot him with a gun. When John checked him for radiation, Caleb confessed to stealing the eggs, but said he stole them out of fear because people weren't friendly. Caleb was a miner who survived because the war broke out while he was underground. He said his co-workers left to look for their families and never returned. Caleb planned to travel south, and when he asked to stay for a few days to recover, John agreed. The devices showed Caleb had mild radiation sickness. He was weak and admitted he had been vomiting. Caleb started setting up a tent, but at Anne's request, John let him stay inside the house. During lunch, Caleb prayed together with Anne and laughed, saying he couldn't believe he had made it this far. While talking about their journeys, John recalled a teenage boy who had stolen clothes from his cart. The boy was covered in vomit and filth, and because he was extremely sick from radiation, he begged John to kill him, but John refused and left him to die by the roadside. Caleb shared a story about his co-workers, explaining that when one tried to go outside, the others stopped him from opening the door to keep radiation out, causing that man to lose his mind, kill most of the people, and then collapse and die himself. When Anne showed sympathy to Caleb, John felt hurt because she hadn't treated him that way. After Anne showed Caleb around, John scolded her for being too close to a stranger, and explained how hard it had been for her since her family disappeared and she had to survive alone. Finally, John confessed that he had actually killed that boy, and after theorizing that the boy might have been Anne's younger brother, he apologized. However, Anne said it was okay and forgave him. A while later, John and Caleb went out hunting together, talking about a rogue faction of looters to the south and discussing radio broadcasts. Caleb's goal is to find that place, but John believes there are probably no people left. Just then, a turkey appeared, and Caleb jokingly said whoever kills the turkey first gets to have it. When John got angry, Caleb laughed it off, saying he was just kidding. While chasing the turkey, John explained his plan to build the water wheel and why he hadn't been able to build it yet. In the end, John managed to shoot the turkey first. That night, while eating the turkey for dinner, Caleb brought up building the water wheel again, making everyone feel uncomfortable. He considered other ways to get materials, but since they lacked tools to cut down trees and other buildings weren't made of wood, Caleb pointed out that the church was their only choice. Because of that, and finally accepted it. The next day, the three of them worked together to dismantle the church, and while doing so, Caleb and kept exchanging intense glances. A few days later, under John's guidance, they successfully built the water wheel. However, John noticed that the looks exchanged between Caleb and Anne were turning into a mutual attraction, and he began to feel annoyed. The group also went to pull cables from utility poles along the road. Later, Anne went to look at the ruins of the church, where Caleb invited her for a walk and comforted her. Caleb shared that his father tried to be a preacher, but ultimately chose women and alcohol instead. Caleb said that although he hadn't been to church in years, his faith never left him. He believes faith protects him today, and that he and Anne are the chosen ones to rebuild. And was happy to find someone understanding in Caleb, unlike John, who is a non-believer. When they returned to the valley, John watched them with a jealous look. That same night, John urged Anne to be with Caleb instead of waiting for him, because he understood that and needed companionship. Because of John's sudden rejection, Anne cried and said she couldn't understand why he was doing this. She kept saying it was fine and that they were just sitting together. As the days continued to pass, everyone worked on building the water wheel, while Anne was left pondering what to do about the men in her life. To install the first half of the water wheel, Caleb wore the protective suit and went down into the contaminated water. This brought a major success to their work, and that night, they celebrated their success with songs and card games. They also jumped into the pond to play a bottle-seeking game, and as Anne and Caleb kept exchanging glances and teaming up, John felt like a third wheel. On the way back to the valley, a hurt John confessed his love to Anne, but didn't say anything back. When they reached home, Anne went to bed with John. However, since John was heavily drunk, he fell asleep immediately. Exhausted from dragging John and dealing with his drinking problem, Anne went to Caleb, and they hooked up in the bathroom. The next morning during breakfast, Caleb gently stroked Anne's head right in front of John, and because Anne felt uncomfortable, she left the table. The two men agreed to continue working without Anne but discussed how extraordinary she was. Caleb actually asked John if he wished he had never shown up, but John denied it, saying they could only finish the water wheel because of Caleb. Caleb just laughed, saying he didn't believe John's words and that John was just jealous. After that, he confessed that instead of searching for the community to the south, he would just stay in the valley. In the afternoon, Caleb put the protective suit back on to help John finish the project. They carefully installed the final pieces, and soon, the water wheel was working properly. After celebrating for a moment, Caleb started climbing back up, but slipped on the wet rocks. Fortunately, John held the rope tightly, so Caleb didn't fall, but while Caleb was making his way up safely, he slipped a second time. John caught the rope at the last second, but stood completely frozen. Thinking about what to do, John and Caleb just stared at each other silently. After a while, John returned to the valley, and went and tried to apologize for last night. John cut her off. John explained that Caleb had left to search for the communities to the south. Unable to believe it, and went looking for him, But no matter how far she ran, she couldn't find him. When John finished all the electrical connections, they finally got electricity. When and returned, she found that John had moved the organ into the house, and when she sat down to play it, John was happy listening to her music.